Testing. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first Agenda Briefing Forum for 2024. This evening is not a decision-making forum. It is a briefing on the agenda for the Ordinary Council meeting, which will be held next Tuesday, the 30th of January 2024. I'd like to remind everyone in the chambers to ensure that comments are respectful to the Council and all meeting attendees, including city officers and those in our public gallery. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging. Item 3, announcements. There are none this evening. Item 4, attendance. Councillor Bull is on approved leave of absence, and Councillor Johnson is just running a few minutes late. All other councillors are present in the chamber this evening. I'll move on to item 5, which is disclosures of interest. But before I go to councillors, I'll just ask the CEO if he wishes to make a comment here.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillors, just in relation to item 10.1.4, the local planning strategy, there's been a couple of questions from councillors throughout the day in relation to potential interests that they believe they may have in relation to this item, whether it be a proximity or a financial interest. We've debated it internally this afternoon, and we are still seeking some advice in relation to it. So what my advice to you would be is that if you believe that you have an interest in the matter, then for the purposes of transparency, then you would declare that. We're going to seek some further advice in relation to the parameters around that proximity or financial interest and issue that out to council over the coming days. So you may want to declare some interest this evening, but we also recommend as well that maybe for the purposes of this evening, while we're clarifying that you may not want to participate in the discussion this evening. And then if we had some time next week before the OCM, we could hold a bit of a Q&A forum if you had any questions in relation to the LPS next Tuesday.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Now I'll ask councillors if they have any interest to disclose. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. 10.2.1, an impartiality interest in relation to the mention of Bayswater Waves. My son swims at Baysy Waves. And then 10.1.4, it's either both or alternatively a proximity and financial interest based on the location of my house and the fact that it's on their local heritage list. So I'd leave the room for any of that discussion either tonight and next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Ladder.
Yeah, I'll declare an interest in 10.1.4 due to my business being in one of the districts in the planning strategy. I'm not sure if that's a proximity or financial, but we'll find out. Thanks.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Yes, thank you. First of all, with regards to 10.1.4, the local planning strategy, I'm just looking at the map that was sent to us today. And can I just get clarification, because I'm a bit confused. So if we reside in one of the areas that are colored in the map, does that mean that we have proximity or financial interest?
I'll go to the CEO.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, that's what we're suggesting. So if you own a property or have an interest in a property within the coloured areas of the map, then there could potentially be a proximity or a financial interest in there. Deputy Mayor, if you've got your address, you can talk to Alex, who can bring it up on the map and confirm with you whilst the Mayor's going through this, just so that you can clarify, because that map is a little bit, you do get the main arterial roads, but it's hard to see the distributor roads and smaller road networks within there on that.
But if it's in a coloured section of the map, that means that there may be a conflict of interest? That's correct. Okay, so it's not white if it's coloured. Okay, so at this stage I will declare a proximity interest of this item until we get more advice for next week. And I would like to declare an impartial interest in item 10.5.3.2, Councillor Complaints Policy. I am currently going through the process with the final outcome not yet determined. I will consider this matter on its merits and remain in the room to vote on this item. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Eveson?
Similar proximity interest for 10.1.4 pending other, obviously anything further. My residential address is in one of the planning strategy areas marked on the image.
Thank you. Anyone else? I'd like to declare an interest in item 10.1.2, proposed naming of Reserve 33059. It mentions the Costantino family, of whom I know members of that family through my role as mayor. It's an impartial interest and I'll be staying in the room. Okay. If there's no other disclosures, I'll move on to item 6, deputations. Councillors, we have received, it should be two written deputations this evening. One from Lauren Butterley in relation to item 11.1, notice of motion, Councillor Nat Latta proposed installation of additional flagpole at City of Bayswater Civic Centre. And the other one is from Wendy Garstone in relation to item 10.1.2, proposed naming of Reserve 33059. These have been provided to councillors and are available on the City's website, and I'll take those as read. So I'll move on to item 7, which is questions on agenda reports, and we'll begin with any questions on items that were subject to deputations. So the first one being 10.1.2, proposed naming of Reserve 33059. Are there any questions from councillors? If not, we'll move on to the next item, which is 11.1, notice of motion from Councillor Latta, proposed installation of additional flagpole at City of Bayswater Civic Centre. Any questions from councillors on this item? Okay, so we'll go, I'll just go around to councillors asking if there are any items you'd like to ask questions on. I have received advice that the Deputy Mayor has listed items in which you have questions. So we'll begin with you, Deputy Mayor, with the first item being 10.1.1, the annual review of delegations.
Thank you. Just bringing this up. Yes, thank you. I have two questions with regards to some of the information in the officer's report in the table. And the first one is on page 21 on our version, on the, whatever you're referring to, the iPad version. Page 21 at the bottom, it talks about the need to amend TPD 01 local planning scheme to show that single house developments will no longer be considered by the council. The officer's report mentions in the middle that the single house provision has passed both houses of parliament and is currently out for advertising until 31st January 2024. And my question is about that information. What does it really mean, the advertisement? It means that the bill has not yet ratified? What's the status of the legislation?
Sorry, Deputy Mayor, just before I go to the directors, Councillor Clark, I'm just querying, did you need me to address anything right
Sorry,
now?
I couldn't get a page number based on, I'm not on the iPad version. So
Oh,
what was the-
hard copy is 39.
And, okay, and I just want to check that didn't relate to the proximity related item, yeah.
No, these are the delegations. Yep. So page 39 at the bottom table, the last column. Okay. So I'll now go to the manager of planning.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we've received information from the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage that essentially the bill has passed both houses of Parliament in November 23 and received royal assent on the 11th of December 23. The consultation largely relates to the changes to the local government decision-making on single house developments in terms of the draft planning and development regulation changes. So those changes to the regulations are currently being advertised.
So it is not really yet in force?
It's not in force as yet, no.
So So the suggestion that we will change the delegation is to preempt what will happen?
Yeah, and align with it when it happens. It's almost certain.
Okay, thank you. The next page in the middle, there is another section called Amend TPD 01 Local Planning Schemes to increase the CEO's delegation for approving development application up to $10 million. So it was not really clear to me, the delegation here. So can we get some, first of all, maybe background about the changes to the JDEP? Because I'm not, first of all, sorry, my first question, one step backwards. Has the state government already made any changes to their legislation on this topic?
Thank you, through the Mayor. Thank you for your question, Deputy Mayor. In terms of the changes to the JDAP reforms,
Yes.
it's something that has been progressed by the Minister. I believe the legislation has been drafted. I would have to confirm if it's made its way to Parliament. The intention is that it will be implemented in the first half of this year. That's the advice I've been received. The intention of this delegation is a couple of things. Number one, with the reform taking place and the likelihood of the JDAPs being reduced down to a $2 million threshold, which is opt-in for anything outside of a single house, so group dwellings, multiple dwellings, anything else. What this delegation does is it provides a genuine alternative pathway for an applicant. So if we had delegation at the City of Bayswater up to $10 million, then an applicant who has a fairly compliant development, because there's also parameters around this delegation as well, would have the ability to apply to the City of Bayswater and allow administration to determine it, as opposed to JDAP determining it, because that's the easiest pathway for them, because they're guaranteed a 90-day statutory timeframe and without having to go to council, which sometimes adds on additional time depending on where an application falls in the cycle of coming to council. So what it does do is it enables us to provide an alternative pathway where applicants may genuinely take that up, and it allows the city to be in control of that application as opposed to it going to JDAP in most instances.
So the planning reform, just to understand, the planning reform will set that any developments above $2 million will have to go to JDAP? Or you said opt-in. What does that mean?
Correct, it's opt-in. So anything that's over $2 million, it's optional for an applicant to either go to JDAP or go through a local government pathway. An applicant is less likely to take the route of a local government pathway if it results in the application having to be determined by council, because it often adds on additional time. Whereas when you undertake a JDAP application, you're restricted in time unless approved by the applicant and the JDAP itself, so you have to determine it within 90 days. This enables them, in terms of applicants, to genuinely consider actually lodging the application with the City of Bayswater, and the City of Bayswater being the determining authority over that application as opposed to JDAP.
So are we able to provide something like that if the legislation will determine that the developers, property owners will have to go to JDAP? Are we able to provide this alternative method? Is this, because we haven't seen the legislation yet. So are we confident that the legislation will allow us to provide this alternative?
Sure, through the Mayor. So as the reform is drafted currently, it's optional over $2 million. So an applicant can currently choose to go through the Joint Development Assessment Panel for determination or a local government. In our instance, our delegation in terms of administration currently is up to $3 million. So anything above $3 million requires consideration by this council, which may deter applicants from applying to the City of Bayswater to have a decision be made, because it may prolong the application or other factors. So what we're suggesting is, if we apply $10 million to start with and see whether this encourages applicants to apply with the City of Bayswater and allow the City of Bayswater to determine their application, then it gives them an alternative pathway. Let's say, for example, the reform changes and it's no longer optional, it's mandatory, anything over $2 million has to go to JDAP, then this delegation would just become redundant.
Okay, so I just have a few more clarifications. It is a big change. So the request here for the delegation for applications up to $10 million to be determined as an alternative avenue by the administration, yeah? So if we did not have this delegation, what will be the situation?
Sure, the current delegation is anything up to $3 million
Okay.
the administration can determine.
So, and above $10 million, what will happen? It will be the council as an alternative avenue?
Yes, correct. So we've suggested $10 million because between 3 and 10 million, it captures a number of developments, but also anything above $10 million is probably significant enough for this council to warrant a decision to be made. In saying that, it's likely that an applicant would still go down the pathway of JDAP if it was over $10 million. And I should preface, when I say anything up to 3 million or anything up to 10 million, there are still parameters in the delegation. So if there is a height variation of a story or more, it would come to council. If there's a height variation of 2 metres or more, it would still come to council for a decision. So we're largely talking about fairly compliant applications that could be determined under delegation.
So those variations that you just mentioned, where are they mentioned?
So they are in your attachment under the Delegated Authority Register.
So they're not mentioned in the table itself?
No,
in the summary?
because these are already in place and we're not proposing to modify.
Okay.
And it's under delegation, doesn't have page 121 on the hard copy. On the electronic version, I don't have a number. So on that page, it says, determine development applications, excluding development applications of prescribed single houses involving the following: an estimated cost of $10 million or more and is not a development assessment panel, building height variation equal to or greater than 2 metres, or where building height requirements refer only to a number of stories, 1 or more additional stories.
Thank you. Just my final question, and I think I touched it before about the timing. So as you mentioned that the bill has not been introduced to Parliament as yet, it means that not even one house has considered that. So why are we preempting this without even knowing what our Parliament will do? Why can't the city wait until in 6 year time and then bring it to us with an amendment to the delegation instrument?
Sure. As I mentioned before, I'll come back to council in terms of whether it has been introduced to Parliament. I'm unclear whether it has or has not, so we'll provide that information as follow-up. Based on the past, the suggestion is in terms of what we receive as JDAP applications. In most instances, applications will be lodged as JDAP applications. So regardless of the outcome of the reform, which we believe is almost certain, but let's say the reform did not proceed, this still is providing a genuine alternative pathway for applicants to lodge an application with the City of Bayswater and for it to be determined by the City of Bayswater as opposed to JDAP. What I can do with the additional information is we can provide you some information around how many JDAPs we have received and how many applications we've actually received that would have qualified to be JDAP as well in the past
you.
year or two.
Yes. So I just found a question, Madam Mayor. So just to clarify the last sentence you just said, so if the bill will not pass, you said that it will still provide an avenue for developers to go with the city instead of going with the JDAP. But from what I understand, it's not taking the council pathway, but going to the administration. This is the change.
Correct. So
Okay.
under the JDAP currently, anything over $2 million can go to JDAP, but you have to be 10 multiple dwellings or more.
Okay, but this, if the bill is not commenced and we are not obliged to do anything and change anything, what it actually will do is any developments between $3 million to $10 million, instead of going potentially to the council, to us, it will go to the administration and councils will not have any say. Thank you.
Any other questions on this item? If not, we'll go to the next item. Deputy Mayor, you've pulled 10.1.3, City of Bayswater naming register.
Thank you. Yes, just a few questions, please, about the attachment, the summary of submissions, which refers to the different names and the officers' comments on each one of them. Number 3 on the first page is Hardy. And I just wanted to note that we have a different spelling, but Hardy Road both in Bayswater and in Maylands. And my question is whether that can create any conflict, where we have, even though it's different Hardy spelling of Hardy, whether that can create any issues.
Thank you. I'll go to the director. Oh, sorry, I'll go to the manager.
It's, I
It's
don't have the hard
page
copy.
161 in the hard copy.
The first page of the
It's
table,
the first page of the table, third entry.
number 3. Hardy.
Thank you.
Through the chair, we would have to consider each name when it's put out for community consultation on its appropriateness. That name might be best appropriate for a reserve rather than a road to reduce that confusion with the existing roads.
Okay, but it can still be included at this
Yes,
stage.
it can.
Thank you. Another follow-up question, and it's a more general, and I saw that in different entries. There is this criteria called based on a demonstrated record of achievement. So what did the city consider when they tick that box? What does it mean, record of achievement?
So through the chair, it's very subjective about what counts as a record of achievement. In our case, we were relying on what information people provided us, and if they could provide us information showing that they had contributed to the community, there were through, I guess, sporting clubs, through community groups and those kinds of things, they were considered to have done a significant contribution.
So for example, just to give an example, entry number 5 refers to commemorate a person that lived in a street for 50 years. And that is the only information that was given to us. So living in a street is sufficient to demonstrate record of achievement for the city?
Yes, at this stage, yes.
So any resident potentially that was nominated, and they were previously lived in the city of Bayswater, that will be enough to qualify as be included in this table and potentially having a street after them.
It's enough to be included in this table, yes. Whether that is approved by Landgate or not, they haven't advised us at this stage.
Okay. Just checking, Madam Mayor, if I have any questions on this. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Councillor Johnson?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. It's not actually necessarily referred to in the report, so just let me know if this is off track. But is kind of follow-up to Deputy Mayor's questions about what's included and what's not. So I understand like the criteria for the names of streets that we've already got is maybe different, maybe was different, has changed. So I understand like the volunteer community groups who were putting together the list of these names and making contributions were seeking information about that to add to their database. And I'm just wondering if it's appropriate in this forum to ask about the community group's access to that information, please.
You're happy to answer?
Yeah, I can,
Okay.
no worries, through the chair. We're currently working with Landgate to work out how we can release that information to them. It is under a licence agreement to the city, and so their advice currently is that we can't release it, but we're working with Landgate to try and see how we can get around that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just to follow-up comment. I mean, Landgate wants information from us, so, you know, it's a bit one way.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
Yes, oh, sorry, just another question. Entry number 45, Ginger. I recall that was one of the options that went out to the public with regards to the landway in Maylands, that we consider the names that triggered the whole thing. Now the city is saying that there is lack of documentation to justify that name. I just wanted to get clarification because we did go to the community with that name. So that is not an option anymore. I recall that previously it was mentioned that someone that served, I think, in one of the World Wars, I think World War One. But now it's mentioned that we do not have enough evidence. Entry number 45.
Through the chair, I'd have to follow up on that one and get back to you on.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this item? I have a few questions. So the first question is, I can see in the attachment that it's the names that have been nominated, you've listed who's nominated them. So there might be some from community groups, there might be some from individuals, there's some from City of Bayswater, and then there's some that Aboriginal elders have considered. But there's some names at the back of the attachment 1 where the city has said name is not appropriate. There's no information in the subsequent attachment about how those names were submitted. So can I get some information why that wasn't included?
We just didn't include it at the time. We can provide it through to you, though. The majority of them would have been from community members.
Okay. And the heading on column where it says policy requirements, and for each of the suggestions, you've either got like use of personal name or recognition and use of Aboriginal names, and then you've got business and commercial names. Was that a criteria that in the submission, the submitter ticked which one they were talking about, or was that just determined by the city officers?
That was determined by the city's officers based on Landgate's policies.
Okay. So, okay. I have some concerns then that there may be some misinterpretations in some. Yep. But this isn't the time to talk about that, so I'll talk to that separately. My other question is, some of the Aboriginal names, it says recognition and use of Aboriginal names, and I noticed that Aboriginal words that translate to their seasons have been included, and when I read, recognition and use of Aboriginal names, the criteria in the policy says names originating from an Australian Aboriginal language local to the area of the topographical feature must be written in a standard. So it's not actually a name, it can be any word. Is that, because I'm thinking a name, like you've got Yagan in here, is a name of a person, whereas a season isn't a name.
It can be a name and, as you say, a word.
It can just be any word.
That's our understanding, yes.
But it doesn't have to be particular to Bayswater. So the season winter, or I'll say the season Birak, that's not specific to Bayswater.
The language has to be specific to Bayswater.
Not the word.
Not the word necessarily.
Okay. Thank you. That's all my questions for now. Any other questions on this item? Okay, I'll move on to... Well, that's all that councillors have advised that they've got questions on. Are there any other questions from councillors before we close the meeting? Councillor Clark?
Yes, I had a couple of questions about 10.5.3.1,
10.5.3, which is,
the payments to independent members of committees and advisory groups.
yes, go ahead.
So despite there being a table which sort of talks about equity, I don't really understand why there's different rates for different committees. So why someone on an audit and risk committee gets $400, but someone on the disability advisory group or the inclusion and diversity advisory group only gets $100.
Thank you. I'll go to the acting manager of governance to respond.
Through the chair, so when we were developing the policy, what we looked at in terms of equity was the amount of time that that particular committee or group member might need to put into actually attending a committee meeting. So, for instance, with the audit and risk committees, the committees have a very long and detailed agenda that they need to read. They need to have specific skills and sometimes professional memberships as well to be able to understand those agendas. So there is a cost to them to be a member. So it's about reimbursing them for their time and effort that they would need to put into those particular committees.
I'm sorry if I don't really understand, because surely there'd be people on the disability advisory group who would also have specialist skills and training and qualifications and perhaps an annual membership of some association, or I don't really understand how that distinction's been formed. It seems to, I don't know, it seems to preface and prioritise the audit and risk committee over everyone else. Is that the intention?
The audit and risk committee is one statutory committee, and it would be considered that somebody would need to put in a lot more effort into reading the agenda. The agenda is a very long and complex agenda for those meetings, whereas for, say, for instance, an advisory group, it wouldn't be such a long, complex agenda to read. So there would be, it would be considered that would be a lot less time that would need to be put into reading the agendas prior to the meeting.
I've just got two other questions then. So also, I thought in discussions, there was discussions around childcare entitlements. It seems that's either not included or it is referred to on page 769 of the printed version, where it's assuming that $100 can cover your childcare costs. So then they don't actually get paid, they're just covering a childcare cost. Is that correct?
Yes, so that was the intention, that the $100 would cover a 2-hour meeting, so it would cover childcare costs and also travel to and from meeting for that period of time, rather than the person having to actually produce invoices and things like that. They would automatically receive the payment for attendance at the meeting.
Okay, and then the other bit that I hadn't understood when we did the advisory group meetings and changing them from committees, is it right to say then that those members do not have to abide by the code of conduct? Is that correct?
I'll go to the manager, acting manager.
Through the chair, yep, for advisory groups, what we've put into the terms of reference that they would be asked to abide by the code of conduct. However, under legislation, they're not actually required to do so. So, as opposed to, say, actual committee members who the actual code of conduct applies to.
So is it then unclear whether or not it applies? Is anyone under any misapprehension? Do you see what I mean? Some people think that it does and others don't.
I'll go to the acting director of corporate.
Through the chair, if I could just clarify, so under the Local Government Act, if you are a committee of council that has been formed under the Act, the Code of Conduct absolutely applies. So if there was a breach of the Code of Conduct, a complaint could be put in and it would go through that assessment process. With the advisory groups, because they haven't been formed as committees under the Act, the Code of Conduct doesn't technically apply. So what we've said in our terms of reference is that you know, the the code of conduct applies in the sense that the principles of the code of conduct apply, and we would expect all members of advisory groups to follow the principles of that. But the code of conduct breach, the complaints process, we wouldn't be able to enforce that code of conduct if there was a complaint. Having said that, though, if there was difficulties with somebody on an advisory group, obviously that could be dealt with in a different way. It doesn't have to be dealt with through a code of conduct process.
Okay, they were my questions. Thank you.
Any other questions on these items? No? I just have one other item that I have a question on, I forgot about. Item 10.5.1.1, the policy review, communications and social media policy. So my question is, at the bottom of page 551 on the hard copy, which is the first page of the report, there's been a suggestion that elected members may also like to consider using the following text for inclusion on our Facebook pages. My question is, can this suggestion be included in the policy, or is that something that can't be included in a policy of council? And thank you.
Through the chair, that is entirely up to the council. If you'd like to include that wording in the social media policy, then that's something that could be included. But it was really just a suggestion for how councillors or elected members may wish to deal with that matter on their social media pages.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Okay, any questions on any other items, councillors? If not, I will close the agenda briefing forum at 7:36 p.m. Thanks, everyone.